Okay. Whew. When the computer locks up 3 minutes before the session starts, not a good start to the session. Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for coming. We welcome you here, and we look forward to your participation in this session. The theme title for the afternoon is Training the Next Generation of Grassland Scientists. My name is Lynn Sollenberger, and I will be moderating, and I'm also the first speaker. So just so you can keep track of where we are, the schedule is not quite right. We do have 6 talks and then a 20-minute panel, but in order to accommodate that, 2 of our talks, Martha's at 4:35, and Kenneth's that follow are 10-minute talks, okay? So that will be the schedule going forward. So what we've done, and I'm going to somewhat provide you some background and a little bit of foundation for understanding and interacting with the remainder of the talks. But we're going to, if you looked, and I'll just go back to this one, but we're going to talk about mentoring from a bunch of different contexts, recognizing that no longer are we in a situation where every graduate student aspires to a career in academia. And we're also then going to represent the perspective of a relatively new academician, as well as some senior academicians, and also a graduate student in this process. All right, so let's launch. I want to begin by addressing this question: what is the value of mentorship? And I'm going to address this question before I really give you an outline of what I'm going to say. Hund et al. Did a survey where they assessed mentoring and mentorship, and they observed from their data that mentorship is positively associated with a wide range of objective measures of graduate student productivity and then career achievement. The quality of the relationship between the mentor and the mentee was found to be a primary determinant of a graduate student assessment of their educational experience. No surprise there. And ineffective mentoring has carryover effects to basically every level of the university. I really like this first statement. These are both from the National Academy of Sciences. But the first statement really kind of grabbed me. Mentorship is a catalyst capable of unleashing potential for discovery, curiosity, and participation in science-related fields. So as students come into our programs, all the raw materials are there. Good mentoring is the catalyst that brings those to the fore. And then lastly, is essential to holistic development of STEM professionals. Okay, so a follow-up question then is, given all these ways in which mentorship contributes, at present, is the value of mentorship being realized? Is that actually translating into the experience that students have? Interestingly, again, back to the survey by Hund et al., they reported that 69% of faculty said that they had no, not some or a little, but no formal mentorship instruction. And again, National Academy suggested that there is a gap. It's very common now, we talk about yield gaps in the 4-H realm, but there is a mentorship gap where our knowledge of what is good mentorship is not met by what we're actually achieving within the academic context. All right, so I need to shift it into a little higher gear here. There are 2 parts of this talk. First, I'm going to synthesize some existing literature. And second, there's going to be kind of the testimonial, the personal perspective. All right? So that's where we're headed. We're going to define mentorship, and then later we'll talk about some observations about mentorship. So in looking at this, I was interested to find out that mentor is actually a person. And mentor goes back to Homer's Odyssey. And so when the king went off to fight in the war, the person that he left behind to take care of his son was mentor. And so hence the name. All right, so we said we're going to begin then with the definition of mentorship. And there are a couple that I'll show you. There are, I'm sure, many. The National Academy defined mentorship as an alliance in which individuals work together to support personal and professional growth, development, and success, and this is a key part, of the relational partners. Notice it does not say of the mentee. Secondly, a relationship in which the mentor guides, supports, challenges the mentee to develop professional identity and competence. And this is also interesting to me in part through role modeling. All right, so what does the literature say about the qualities of an effective mentor? So mentors should be a discipline expert. That's one that we typically don't have a lot of time, a lot of problem conceiving of, right? Altruistic, focused on the experience of the mentee. Flexible, honest, positive. The next one is one that we probably need to really think about, and that is our accessibility and the availability of time that we're able to give. And then capable of identifying strengths and weaknesses of the mentee. All right, so those are some of the characteristics. How do they translate into action? So the actions of an effective mentor include establishing clear expectations. I've seen throughout my career a number of students who don't really know what their mentor wants of them. And so this is a really important point. The activities of a mentor build trust. There's honest and transparent communication. Confidentiality is really critical. And the ability to admit when you, the mentor, have screwed up. Okay? In my experience, at least, I may be the only one, but in my experience, it has happened. Right? A mentor is adaptable, recognizing that each student is different, but also that students progress as they move through your program. And so you adapt your mentoring style sequentially throughout the course of a graduate degree. All right, then what are the outcomes of effective mentorship? And we've alluded to these already. The HUN data suggest productivity, creativity, inclusion, equity, and mental health are all enhanced by effective mentorship. Reduce stress, anxiety, and depression. And my interactions with graduate students, particularly during the period of COVID and following, would suggest that that would be an especially important outcome of an effective mentoring process. Some of us are specifically focused on product, and even if you're specifically focused on product, effective mentoring is associated with publications, presentations, and interest in the overall research program. And a mentee who has been effectively mentored is more likely to accept an academic tenure track position and be more satisfied with the job that they obtain. All right, that's a quick synopsis of the literature on mentoring and mentorship. And now I want to give you some personal perspectives. So some of you know me, some of you have no idea who I am or what I do. So I just wanted to give you a real quick snippet that I have done a little of this anyway, okay? So I have been doing this, it pains me to say, but for 38 years, all right? And over that time, I have served in a mentoring relationship with over 200 individuals. And some of the numbers are there. I won't go into the details on those. One of the other really key ways in which I have gained an insight into mentoring is 14 years serving as graduate coordinator in our department, because then I get to see the outcomes not only of my own mentoring, but the mentoring of all the faculty who are in my department. All right, so I'm going to give you a few items related to my personal philosophy. And I've made this argument that apart from the mentee, the mentor has the greatest impact on the overall educational experience of the mentee, all right? And so that leads me to say to prospective students that second only to your choice of a life partner, you need to carefully choose your mentor. And I follow that up by saying they can make your life as if it's approaching heaven or hell. I argue with my administrators at times that exceptional mentoring should be a core value of the academic institution. It is definitely not a casual task. I am a father of 4. Parenting is not a casual task, but neither is mentoring. If we accept this role, it's kind of like, if you choose to accept this mission, right? There are things that go along with it: commitment of time, energy, and enthusiasm. And I argue that effective mentors are present, interactive, and engaged. I sometimes say that I don't think mentoring is most effectively communicated within the large family model, where there are so many kids, and there are older kids and younger kids, and the younger kids basically get to know the older kids, but not the parents. That's not a model that I ascribe to, nor that I feel is the best approach for mentoring. I'm very concerned about time use efficiency, but in terms of mentoring students, that's not a very useful strategy. All right, what are priority mentoring activities? One thing I do is and it's mandated actually at the University of Florida, we have an individual development plan where we figure out very early in the game, first couple weeks, the goals of the mentee. We begin an assessment of strengths and weaknesses, and we develop then a concrete plan to address those weaknesses in such a way that it will allow them to achieve whatever it is that they wish to achieve following completion of the program. We spend a lot of time getting to know each other in developing a project. It's intense mentor-mentee interaction. It's both intellectually stimulating and exhausting, and it often occurs over a period of months. Priority mentoring activities continued. Spend time collecting data, particularly early in a program and early in a project. I don't consider any graduate projects to be throwaways. I'm not satisfied with failure. And so that requires that I be there to make sure that things that we can avoid, we do. And it also shows that I'm willing to do whatever it is on the hottest, most humid day that Florida can throw at us that I'm asking my graduate students to do, all right? It confirms the mentor is fully invested, avoids fatal flaws, increases proportion of projects that are published, and it creates a culture that I think is effective. All right, filling a resume. That's the reality of one of the things that we need to do. I think it's important for mentors to have an award strategy with their students. Presentations, I emphasize oral presentations for my students. Posters are good if you have to do them, but They need to learn to speak in front of an audience, and the way you get to be known is not by standing in front of a poster, but by communicating to a larger audience like you. We emphasize preparation. We have a culture of publication. And the job-seeking process is a collaborative effort. I have some metrics where I evaluate mentorship. This is how I evaluate myself. A good mentor, I think, is sought after by prospective mentees. The mentee is one who receives awards and recognition. I observe growth. I used to coach a lot of baseball, and I didn't evaluate my coaching based on how we ended the season, but the difference between where we started and where we ended. And that's how I evaluate the performance of a mentor in terms of academic programs. Mentees must master skills critical to success, and I need to facilitate that, and then success in the job market. All right. So one of the things we were asked to look at is future mentorship challenge in grassland science. In any discipline, you need to create and sustain a diverse group of well-trained specialists. So we have to accomplish that. One of the things that's kind of unique or interesting about grassland science is that we're facing the challenge of, in many cases, of decreasing numbers of mentors. And so as mentors, one of the things that we need to do to guarantee that there will be a future of grassland science is that we need to step up to the game and increase the dynamics of our own individual research programs to make sure that we're invaluable and that to make sure that we are still here whenever some prospective mentee wants to work in grassland science. I advocate that research questions should both advance the science, the mechanisms, and serve agricultural clientele. I think one of the ways we've been successful at the University of Florida is that we've been able to address both and to sustain clientele support for our programs. In the future, we're going to have to do things differently, and there are a lot of new tools that are coming on board to do that. So let me wrap up by saying that effective training for academic positions requires much greater or broader awareness of best practices of mentorship. Our discipline will be enhanced if we achieve greater diversity, and along with that, recognition that mentorship of underrepresented populations may look different than what we have become accustomed to or our standard practice. And lastly, then, sustaining a critical mass. It's going to be a challenge. It's going to require on the part of the mentors creativity, willingness to accept change, and maintaining our own existing programs through research funding and relevance to clientele groups. So with that, I will call it a day, and could somebody tell me, we were so scattered, what time is it? 3:37, so I am done. And Marta, you're going to load Dennis's presentation.
Is it on there?
You don't need to. Your
Is it on there?
presentation is already here.
Okay.
How are you, Dennis?
I'm good. Did they bring it from the other room?
Yes, we did.
Thank you.
No, it's not.
It's embarrassing. I
No,
apologize.
train the next generation, right? So my computer, this is my computer, is a little old. Sometimes it doesn't.
Thank you, sir.
So if you need to use this to pass, you might need to use the space or the
Okay.
arrow. I don't remember which one.
Okay, either one should work.
And Dennis, I was going to introduce you, so let me
Please
take
do.
care of that. Sorry, we got a little disjointed with our issues, but our next speaker is Dennis Hancock. Dennis is currently the Center Director at the U.S. Dairy Forage Center in Madison and part of the USDA ARS. Dennis also, in a previous life, was a faculty member, an extension forage specialist at the University of Georgia, and so he's going to address the issue of mentoring for extension positions. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Lynn. And I violated Extension Rule 101, which is to make sure when you load your presentation, you put it on the right computer before going over to the other session. And thanks to Marta for bringing it over from the computer next door to ensure that we have it here. I bring to you today a one person's opinion, and I'm not sure why this thing is not wanting to stay on the podium. Something is under it. There we go. I didn't want it to fall. And I will give a disclaimer here at the beginning. This is one person's opinion. It's my opinion. There's not a lot of data that's going to underpin a lot of what I'm going to talk about today, so it's unlike most of the talks you've heard this week. But I do come with a little bit of experience, and I won't go into the grand details here, but I've spent a lot of time in extension, both at the local extension office level as well as at kind of a state or regional level, and now actually mentoring even some national extension specialists in some roles. And what I'd like to begin with is just a real brief statement about what I call Big E extension. And one of the things I'm always curious about is why there's this, I always like to use the capital letter E with extension, because it really is the extension service. It is a proper noun. And how we really engage with our audience. And so what is that? And of course, extension is extending that research-based information to practitioners and to those who serve those practitioners in many ways. And when it comes to A&R, or agricultural and natural resources, we're primarily focused on agricultural productivity, but we want to do so without compromising natural resources, and we want to be able to ultimately support those rural economies. Many of us come from a rural background and want to sustain those rural communities. This is conducted at a variety of scales, and I've already talked about my background. It started at the county level, but it involves all along that scale, all the way to the international level, of which we are this week participating in what I would call extension work. The educational foundation is I think, pretty ironclad, right? You really need to have an in-depth mastery of agronomy and animal science principles, including all the things I'm listing here, and probably 2 textbooks worth of information that we could spend 2 semesters and still not even really scratch the surface on. And it's really important to understand how all of these things link together, whether we're talking about grazing management and nutrition or fertility. All of those things do link together, and seeing it holistically is very important. And I'm going to throw several other subjects here that whomever does get into a role like this definitely needs to understand what they're looking at a variety of levels, a variety of scales, particularly from a soil standpoint, the weed, insect, pests, interactions, etc. Now, from a mentorship standpoint, and as we go through this, you'll see that I've kind of taken a middle-of-the-road point of view and talking not only about what a faculty member should be doing to train new extension specialists, but how we should be engaging with young faculty who are extension specialists. How do we mentor them, and how do we bring them along? How do we encourage them? And these principles are relatively few, but the applications are many. I see Katie and Lisa back there, they're kind of smiling. I don't know how many times they heard me say this, but the principles are few, the applications are many. And when you get in the real world, sometimes you may not have a lot of data to back up where you're coming from. So what are some beneficial experiences for folks to come into an extension role? I think having some time spent on a farm or an agency that serves one of those companies or one of those farm entities would certainly be beneficial. I grew up on a farm, so that was a bit of a default for me. But to intern or work with an extension office or an extension specialist would also be highly desirable. And I would encourage those of you who are extension specialists to reach out to undergraduate students, to mentor them, to bring them in, give them the experience of going out on the road with you to do extension meetings, etc. In addition, I think the major professor has a responsibility to make sure that those students know how to get grants, find them, get grants, write good proposals, report on the results, not just in putting out a publication, but also taking that result to the field and sharing that information to the producers. And we often would involve our students in training the practitioners and extension agents across the country. In the U.S., for those of you that are outside the U.S. and may not understand quite the dynamic that we have, is most of our extension specialists are based within, as faculty members within a university, usually the land-grant university. They dedicate a specific percent of their time either to research and extension or research and education, and sometimes all three. And for those of you that do all three, God help you. I don't know how in the world you do all three at any land-grant institution. I only had research and extension, and that was quite enough. And to make matters worse, nowadays a lot of these are on 9-month appointments. They have to go chase another 3 months worth of salary to give them a full-time job, I guess. But most of the time this is at a statewide level for the extension specialists. Sometimes these are on a regional basis or a multi-state or national responsibility. But not all land-grant universities have specialists who focus on forage and grazing lands. And this is becoming increasingly a challenge. In fact, I want to share with you some recent summary work that, well, it's not so recent now, it's getting a little dated, about 15 years ago, that Monty Roquette and several others, Lynn, I believe, was on this publication as well, looked at state funding, federal funding, and grant funding for extension specialists at the time in 2008, and then they surveyed them to what their expectations were going to be 10 years from then. And I've added a column here to kind of give you my breakdown the last full year that I was at UGA, just to give you a sense of how this all matches up. So for their survey results, is about 45% state funding, 12% federal funding, and 43% coming from grants. And they projected that in 10 years' time it would be majority grants. And that certainly came true for me, and I expect that most of you that do this in the audience would probably have fairly similar numbers to what I had. Less than a third actually came from state or federal funding, and that included, by the way, my salary and my technician's salary. And very few extension specialists have, or any faculty member for that matter, has both extension salary for themselves as well as for a technician. But over half of my money came from grants, and we didn't have a whole lot of industry funding by the time I left. Fortunately, in Georgia, we had some commodity funding, but we even charged a lot of fees to be able to make sure that our programs were cost effective as well, that they paid their way. And I mentioned funding as a preference for political aspects of things. I think we have to maintain an understanding of the political framework that we operate in and the lay of the land. Now, that's not to suggest that extension scientists need to participate in politics. They need to be very apolitical, in fact. But to be successful, they need to understand that landscape, especially in anticipating what is next. Where are funding sources going to be willing to throw money at, and what subjects are we going to study? You have to be familiar with the buzzwords that come along and the changes in those buzzwords and adapt your program accordingly. But I would say that you always have to maintain the fact that the data say what the data say. And if you start, especially when it comes to industry funds, if you start saying what the sponsor wants you to say, then you're in trouble. You're running a great risk in that scenario. So it's extremely important, in my view, to maintain an ethical image. We'll come back to ethics in just a moment, but I want to talk about what I call the 5 R's of extension work. The keystone of this, the very top of this, is relationships. As an extension person, whether as an educator in the local level or as a statewide level, your primary job is to build relationships and networks. You have to do that because that allows you to educate yourself about what is relevant, what you need to be working on. And as long as you're providing good results off of that research and effort and reporting on that and showing a return on investment to your stakeholders and that they are engaged at every process in that curve, you're going to be a successful person as long as then you maintain ethics and trust. And the base, the bearing on which all of this turns is the ethics and trust. This is very, very crucial, and that's what really sustains those relationships. One of the fun things about the job, too, is that you adopt a personality and a persona that you portray. And you can kind of lean into this at times, too. You try to take on that. And I'll give an example from my own background. And when I first got to Georgia, I was really constantly talking about not cutting for hay too short or not grazing too close, that you always want to leave a little bit of grass there. And I adopted this phrase, I think I heard it from some Kiwi, grass grows grass, right? And to the point where all of my producers would say, that's going to be on your tombstone one of these days. And it eventually turned into, they just started calling me the grass man. So you kind of develop this, and what I mean by that in terms of developing a persona, you market yourself. You're marketing yourself to the people that you're trying to build that relationship with. And we did that with logos and swag. I was talking about industry fees or fee generation. This is one of the ways that we paid for things, was to sell product. But at the end of the day, we need to cultivate a sense of purpose. And for our graduate students in particular that are going into this field, I think this is urgent that we cultivate a sense of purpose. On those days and weeks in which you're spending 60 to 80 hours on the road or doing various activities and you're absolutely worn out, and then you remember, there's a reason I'm doing this. That passion, and you can tell still's in me, is, it's a zeal. I don't know why I always do this. But it's a relationship. You've built a relationship. Those people are very important to you. And you want to have that passion and show it, and that helps to build that relationship. But it's also important that I think for you to understand from your own mission, what your focus is. What are you on this earth to do? And to reflect on that from time to time is very, very important. By the way, it needs to be written down. Don't just have it, because that will change over time. It needs to be written down so that you know your why. Especially given the fact that you're not going to get paid extraordinarily well, especially by comparison to the industry standards. But don't be afraid to explore options in the industry as well. The best raise you'll ever get is one that you go out and get yourself. For those of you that know what I'm talking about, you know what I'm talking about. You've got to establish your value in the marketplace. And for those that aren't doing that, I would encourage you to consider doing so. This mentorship is absolutely crucial for extension specialists because of a number of factors, and we're expected to know. You get up in front of the audience and you're wearing a tie and you're more than 90 miles away from home, you're the expert, right? You're supposed to know. So if you don't know, that can be an ego blow, but you need to know when you don't know. You need to pass off that question to someone who can answer it, but make sure you follow up and get that question answered. Often, and I would say even the majority of time, you may not have data that really explicitly answers the question that they're trying to give to you. So you have to rely back on those principles. Those principles have a lot of applications, and you can give an educated assessment. It's not a guess. You're basing it on those principles. Anyone who thinks they've got it all figured out is also headed for a disaster. And I've met more than a few folks who kind of a bit more out over their skis probably than they need to be. And occasionally they will stumble. And sometimes when you do stumble, it's humbling and humiliating, but you got to pick yourself up, dust yourself off, and continue on. And that's where mentorship really is a key part. And I was so lucky to have the folks like Carl Hovland, who was 2 doors down from me, Nick Hill, who's somewhere around this conference as well, Don Ball and Gary Lacefield, and Lynn in Florida, and several others around who were able to encourage me and to help answer crazy questions when I would call them later on with it. Be self-aware with a healthy self-criticism as well. And I want to talk about something. I don't know that anyone else is going to visit on this, but I think this is important. This imposter syndrome is not something to be dismissed lightly. Imposter syndrome is very common among high-performing individuals. And they may not think that they're high-performing, but it's very common amongst them. Some deal with this by working harder, longer hours, setting higher standards for themselves than what are necessary. If this is unchecked, it can lead to burnout. It can also lead to reduced performance, and ultimately it can also threaten their mental health. And I encourage those folks who are challenged by this to really seek help. Maybe you can't go to your mentor. Maybe even that's something that you don't feel comfortable going to a mentor about. But do seek professional help if this is an issue. I've seen a number of friends of mine who have sought professional help, and it's done them a world of good to get them back, straightened back out, and having a better balance here. Speaking of balance, balancing work and professional life, or personal life, is really challenging, and especially in the context of forage and grazing lands where a lot of our folks work off farm. So for them to meet, they need to meet at night or on the weekends. And so that consumes a lot of time, and a lot of time on the road as well. To the degree that you can, integrate your family into extension activities. You can see my youngest son there with me standing in a field of alfalfa in South Georgia somewhere. That is a real important part of raising a family while being in extension. Place limits on the number of weekends and nights that you're willing to work. Be very careful about balancing out and planning out your schedule so that you can attend events. I wasn't necessarily a good example of that. I wasn't home for a lot of the ball games, et cetera, and I have many regrets about that. But be sure and plan time to do that, and to plan time to sharpen the saw, to, as Stephen Covey calls it, sharpen the saw, where you spend some time away till you recharge your batteries. They give you annual leave for a very good reason. You should use it, okay? Extension clientele rarely question whether or not if you're prioritizing family activities, they will rarely question it. And if someone does question it, their opinion is invalid. All right? So just in summary, I would just like to say, again, to reiterate, cultivate a sense of purpose. The position aligns with your professional or your personal mission as well as your professional mission. If you have that passion for farm families and the ag community and natural resource stewardship, you can really bring that into full effect in this role. Self-confidence and knowledge is obviously key, but it has their limits, and one needs to be able to balance that as well as balancing a life on the outside as well as their work. So with that, if there are time for questions, I'll take them. If not, we'll transition over.
Let's thank our speaker. While we're getting the next presentation set up, we have time for a question or two. Dennis, I'm going to hand you this mic.
Okay.
Anybody have a question for Dennis?
If any of my former graduate students raise their hands, I'm not going to call them. I'll be around if you later on if you do have any questions. Peter?
Maybe not so much a question since nobody seems to have one, but just to reinforce your message about taking care of yourselves, about the importance of mental health both within the communities we serve and ourselves, and the area of addiction that can frequently rise up. So find the people, to help. Don't try to do this on your own. It ain't gonna work.
Very true. All right. Thank you all.
Thank you, Dennis. So we're trying also to integrate an industry element to this theme, and we've asked James Estrada. James is a faculty member at the University of Florida, and he's going to discuss some of the innovations that he has helped develop at the university.
All right, thank you, Lynn. Can everybody hear me okay with the microphone? So a little bit of background about me. I've been in education for about 25 years. I started teaching as a graduate student, and part of my new position at UF has really been tackling professional development programs. And it just sort of blended over into graduate training, and that's sort of been my focus for the past 5 years. So today I'm going to talk to you about 2 programs that we run at UF that are really designed specifically to train graduate students and allow them to transition a little bit better from academia to industry. So a couple quick stats for you. We award about 1 million degrees per year, graduate degrees per year, and this is including everything. So this is medical degrees, law degrees, everything. Of those, about 200,000 of them are PhDs. And this is a little bit of switch from the time that I was in school and probably a lot of time when you were in school. A growing number of people or graduate students are reporting that they are at least interested in pursuing a career in industry. When I was in graduate student, I didn't even know that industry was an option. Everybody was just going into academia. That was the whole point of getting a master's and a PhD. But now in agriculture, we have between 70 and 80% of our graduate students saying that they are at least interested in industry. And that's a little bit fortuitous because we do have high retirement rates in this sector. Some estimates are about 50% turnover in the next decade in ag. And companies are targeting candidates with a really diverse skill set. So in theory, this looks great, right? We're creating a lot of advanced trained students, and they are interested in a field where there's lots of jobs that are going to be opening over the next 10, 15 years. I'm sure you could guess that there's a however coming, but there is a however. And the however is really what has, I guess, spawned a lot of the programs that I'm running at UF. And that's that stakeholders are telling us that we're still training students to be academics. In reality, what we're doing is we're just training them to replace us. We're not giving them the skill sets that are required a lot of times to be successful in these companies and in these industries. And so they came to us, particularly Syngenta, Florida Crystals, and a couple other ones that we have close partnerships with at UF, came to us and asked if there was a way that we could better train graduate students to succeed when they transition to those positions. And so we just sort of asked ourselves, this was about 5-6 years ago, we were sitting down in a meeting and we just thought, what can we do? We can't change our whole graduate student curriculum. We can't just come in and introduce a ton of new classes because students won't take them necessarily. So what can we do that just sort of changes things a little bit and gives them some better preparation? And so what we decided to do was really make organizations active participants in the student training. So we wanted to hear from them. What kind of skills do you want from your graduate students or your future applicants? What do you think that they're lacking, and how can we sort of provide those to them? And we came up with 2 different programs. So through both agronomy and the graduate student, we offer 2 things that I'm going to talk about briefly today. The first is the Accelerate to Industry program. This is a partnership that we do with NC State University, and we run this in conjunction now with what's called the Job Search Series with the graduate school at UF, and then also our project team courses. So I'm going to talk briefly about both of these. So the Accelerate to Industry program is extremely unique. It started out as a 3-day program. It expanded to a 5-day program. And what we do is we invite companies to the University of Florida. They send representatives, usually between 5 and 7 reps, to come in and essentially lead activities for a full week. And we focus really on professional development. It's not focused on, hey, this is our company, here's the kind of jobs, come. It's not a job fair, It's about them leading presentations, activities, tasks, workshops that are dedicated to what we used to call soft skills, right? That I like to refer more to as accessory skills. So things like leadership, professionalism, communication, goal setting, teamwork. And again, these are all industry identified skills that they feel that students need, that they're lacking, and they come in and they help find ways to train students better in these areas. And so again, the goal is really to sort of ease the transition, give students more confidence in these areas, and allow them to succeed when they move on from UF. The concept at UF is a little bit different than what they do at NC State, but we try to maintain a very broad appeal. This is all run through the College of Ag. or at least in the past it was, but I still try to maintain a broad appeal because these are skills that transition whether you're in academia, whether you're in industry, regardless of what kind of position you have in industry. These are all skills that people need. So we try to maintain a broad appeal in the program. We also try to recruit students from a very diverse background. So we want students to come in that are from engineering, from med, from CALS, whatever the case may be. We want to get students from all areas and help with that training, especially now that we run it through the graduate college. We really focus on those professional skill development activities. We try to bring in a diverse set of companies. One of the things I've learned from doing this is students are not aware of the breadth of positions that are available to them. So we try to bring in nonprofit organizations, startups, small companies, large global institutions or organizations like Syngenta. So we really try to span the range of possibilities and introduce students to as many of those as possible. And then we open it up to all graduate students and postdocs. Originally, this was all graduate students just within CALS. Now it's university-wide. So we just ran one in March. I think we had 150 students participate in the job search series. Of those, 40 of them went through the A2I training. Benefits to participants. So first thing is they get access to employers and stakeholders that are interested in making connections with students at UF and that are probably hiring now. That's a big deal because they get to sit down with them one-on-one, have conversations with them. They get to look over their CVs and resumes, talk about job prep. So it's a very close interaction that they don't get through other programs. They get to learn about career options within these organizations. They get to go through these industry-led skill development programs. And one of the big things is all the students have to submit CVs and resumes when they enter the program. Those CVs and resumes go to the industry mentors who then sit down and go through the CV and resume with the students and provide feedback. So it's really giving them a lot of confidence in the materials that they're going to be presenting as they move on and apply for positions. And we also do mock interviews to practice interview skills as well. And again, these are all led by industry mentors. And most of them send HR reps. So these are the people who would normally be hiring you. So getting tips from people like that is something that students just normally do not have access to, and we found is hugely beneficial to our graduate students. Feedback has been great. I'm not going to go through all of these, but students have repeatedly said that it's one of the best symposiums they've attended, particularly when it comes to professional development, and the companies love it. The thing that surprised me the most, I think, talking to industry reps is that their biggest challenge is getting in front of very well-trained students. Get me in front of people who are potential hires for me. That is a real problem for them. So this program alleviates that to the point where they're willing to pay to come on campus to be part of this program. And so just for them, having access to 30 to 40 of our top graduate students is huge. If they go through a recruiting program, like there's companies out there that will recruit people for your positions, that's $30,000, $40,000, $50,000 that they have to pay to do that. We can do that for a fraction of that and probably better tailor the graduate students to their needs. The project team course, so this is the second piece that I want to touch on. This is similar, but what we do with this is a company comes to us with a problem. So a problem that they're trying to solve. And we recruit a group of graduate students, usually between 3 and 6, and they spend the whole semester working on that project and trying to solve the problem for the company. So we always tell them that they're acting like a consulting team for that organization. So this is really hands-on experience solving a real-world problem. How many graduate students are in here today? All right, I'm going to speak poorly of you for a second, so feel free to ignore this part. But graduate students are a little bit fickle when it comes to course requirements. And so when we started this, we ask, do you want structure or do you not want structure? And everybody wanted structure. They wanted to know exactly when the assignments were due, and they wanted us to walk them from A to B to C to D. And then as we did that, they just complained about it. So we said, fine, and we pulled away from it entirely. So now what we do is the students are really in charge of a large portion of the schedule. So we only set about 55% of the schedule and assignments. The students dictate the rest. And that's part of that time management sort of organizational piece that we want to confer. So they have to come up and think, how many presentations am I going to need? How much feedback am I going to need on these papers? What kind of assignments should I spread out, and how many points should they be worth? So we actually have them fill in the majority of the course schedule, and we find that it creates a lot of buy-in and investment in the project, and they're much more dedicated to the work. So a couple quick examples here of classes. We worked with a company in Costa Rica looking at a selection of cool season grasses. This was very experimental based. So the students came up with an experimental design to test some of these grass mixtures. And the company, I spoke to them about 6 months ago, they actually did this experiment. So it's a really unique opportunity for students to see something that they come up with implemented in an industry setting. The other end of that, Syngenta, we stayed away from the experiment. This is the last class I taught. This is more investigation of ways of working, which I thought was really cool because it gives students insight into how a big company works and kind of how information flows through a global corporation. But they were able to identify a problem, go through all the ways of working within Syngenta, identify what were the specific sticking points, and then come up with recommendations to solve those problems. And again, Syngenta is planning on going through and implementing some of these changes. We're building off of this in the next semester. So this was done just in the Americas. Now, in the fall, we're going to be building and starting to look across the globe and looking at communication and ways of working so that Syngenta can better streamline and become more efficient globally. So it's a really cool opportunity, I think, for students to do work that's actually meaningful to these organizations. And we've had several hires come of this class. So it's definitely creating networking opportunities that we wouldn't otherwise. I think in general, I just put this up because I think students do really enjoy the class. It's different. There's no quizzes, there's no exams. It's all just about progress and getting through that project and getting to your end goal. But this we did all over Zoom this past semester. These are students from just the spring. And I think they really found that delegation, teamwork, and just creating this plan and following through with it was extremely rewarding. And at the end of the class, they get to present to the reps. And so they get, again, another really valuable interaction in terms of dealing with industry mentors. Outcomes, just to kind of sum up here, for A2I, we've had about 15 different industry sponsors over the past 3 or 4 years. We've had about 200 total participants. We've had multiple hires come from the program, and like I said, the industry reps do pay to come on campus, so we've generated about $35,000 in revenue for the program, which allows us to expand to bigger rooms, have more food, things like that, provide scholarships for students. And we've had about 12 project team courses over a variety of subjects. We've had multiple internships and 1 hire come from those. And students report that they feel better prepared to enter industry because of this experience. They've had the ability essentially to go through and work like they would in the industry in terms of research, and they feel like they benefited greatly from those interactions. So all in all, I think both of these have been really successful. They are both definitely works in progress where we're trying to refine. I'm happy to answer any questions about that, or people have feedback from anything similar. I'd love to hear it during the panel discussions. So that's my talk.
Yeah. Thanks very much, James. We do have time for some questions. I'm going to hand the mic to James, and feel free to jump in.
Thank you. Yeah.
How are you able to get the initial buy-in from stakeholders?
Yeah, sell. Like it's really hard. That was probably the biggest challenge when I started. I mean, you don't learn in graduate school how to ask people for money. But luckily, NC State had already had the program, and they had been running it for about a year, so I had some data to rely on. But really, it came down to running it a few more times, even giving people sort of freebies in the beginning, getting them hooked, getting them to see the experience, and then they tended to buy on after that. So it was really showing concrete benefit. Yeah.
If you're really successful, isn't there a danger you're going to lose all your best students to business?
It's possible, yeah. I mean, luckily this has been a pretty small subset, and some of the students have taken it honestly and then came to the conclusion that they don't want to go into industry, that they want to go back to academia. But I think that's really important, letting them sort of get an experience in it and figure out if that's really what they want to do. Yeah.
Consider government agencies that are not academic to be part of this program, and part of the target of this program. I'm talking about state agencies as well as federal agencies like Forestry Service or Park Wildlife departments or something.
Yep. Yeah, we've had Fish and Game and a variety of other people come to it just so that, again, people can see the full breadth of it. And projects and research at that kind of an institution is drastically different than at like Syngenta. And so we try to bring in as broad of a patch of those organizations as possible. Yeah.
Time for one more question.
All right. Thank you very much.
Our next speaker is Marietta Alita. Marietta has had a long career in working in a wide range of international settings, significantly in Africa. She is currently the program director for Farmer to Farmer program as part of the organization Cultivating New Frontiers in Agriculture, and is based in Lusaka, Zambia. Marietta.
Thank you very much for that. And, I was thinking about James's presentation, and I think it would be actually great also in terms of international agriculture. There would be many organizations, I think, that would be very happy to come to University of Florida and do these kinds of sessions with students to attract people who are in agriculture. So thank you very much for that. And now we are going to move into international agriculture. And, I have a very simple presentation with a simple goal. And I think, and in some ways, it very much also relates to my current work. And the main message, I think, is that it is never too late to engage in international agriculture as grassland scientists. So I will be focusing on different kind of ways that you can engage, and people are engaging in international agriculture. And in my current work, which I will tell you a little bit about, I see people who engage in international work when they have retired, and they still end up having just another career volunteering in international work. So that is basically my presentation. I just wanted to tell you it a little bit before I started. So, and my perspective in terms of international work is very much the developing countries. So the ones that are really I mainly worked in developing countries. I've done a little bit of work also in middle-income countries. I currently work in Moldova, which is Europe's poorest country. But otherwise, all my work focuses on Southern Africa. So I will kind of go through, I introduce myself a little bit, and then I go through ways in which one can kind of build a career in international work, and how it is you can prepare for it, especially for those who are maybe in the beginning of their careers, and then also reflect on basically on my own career in international agriculture. There are, although I have always completely focused my work on development and international work, but there are, and therefore consider there are just amazing opportunities. There are amazing opportunities for learning, for personal growth, but there are of course also challenges. It is not always so easy. And for some people especially, it can be quite difficult depending on, for example, family circumstances. So just a little bit about myself. I work for an organization called CNFA. It is actually Cultivating New Frontiers in Agriculture. It is basically one of the international development organizations that mainly implements projects for USAID. It is based in Washington, D.C. And I'm currently working as the program director, as Lynn said, for the Farmer to Farmer program, which is an expert volunteer program that brings US volunteers to developing countries and middle-income countries for short-term assignments. The program is global, but I am currently working in Southern Africa and Moldova. My personal background is that I have a PhD in agronomy. I worked with Lynn as my advisor, and he shouldn't consider, and I don't think he does consider it as any kind of a problem in terms of him being a mentor, that I did not stay at the university. I was always completely focused on development and development work. So I have worked mainly in Africa, so I spent about 12 years living in West Africa, mainly from Ghana, but working a lot also in the coastal countries and the Sahel, and now I've been 5 years almost in Zambia. I've also worked in Mexico for my PhD, and then Thailand. So why international work when you are considering as a grassland scientist, why to do international work? And I'm really focusing on developing countries. As you all very well know, they have incredible role in the lives of some of the poorest peoples in the world. And there's incredible need for dedicated scientists, trained experts to work in these areas. It is very compelling work. It is extremely rewarding work. It can also be very challenging work. But that is, I think, something that most of us are looking for, and is something that we eventually, when we look back at our careers, is something that we really hope that we have had. But there are many ways to engage. It doesn't have to be the kind of career, for example, that I have had. So, there are ways to engage with international work from US or from Europe, but you can also be based in the developing countries. There are different foci for the work. You can be research, development, or both. And for many, I think, with research background, even if you go to development, it is really nice to kind of keep a little bit of engagement also on the research side. You can work on the not-for-profit sector, in private sector, amazing opportunities currently in Africa, and as a donor. Full-time, part-time, but also salaried, and very importantly, volunteering is there. So I just quickly kind of go through, and I'm not going to spend much time on this because I think it is more important to kind of spend more time on the reflections. And, but you all know that, many now are really starting to be engaged internationally already as undergraduates, during undergraduate studies. And there has been actually there was a six-fold growth between 1989 and 2020 in terms of students who, as undergraduates, had an international experience. It has been shown in study after study that those students actually do better, they do better later in work, they are more motivated, they are more likely to go from 2-year institutions to 4-year institutions. But there are, of course, also challenges for some students to engage at that time in terms of affordability or time, or for students from some backgrounds, it might be difficult to get the information. Graduate opportunities also, and very similar kinds of positive impacts from kind of short-term stays in internationally have been also noted for graduate students. So if they do an internship or maybe a summer in a developing country or other location during their studies, they tend to have benefits in terms of their careers, in terms of their motivations. And I want to mention, for example, short-term opportunities are available in the International Agricultural Research Centers, great places in terms of either kind of short internships or then also graduate research. And I was very lucky to be able to do both my master's and PhD research in the international centers that belong to the CGIAR. I was at IITA in Nigeria for my master's, and then at CIMIT for my PhD. And, I think here we really have to also consider, students who come from countries that are developing countries. And, for them having these opportunities to also do some international work, some research, either in their home country or perhaps in similar kinds of conditions, is really something that many of them are looking for. And there was a study, for example, at the University of Minnesota, where students were really asking, coming from developing countries, they were really saying that they would need to have kinds of experiences, for example, with the mixed livestock crop systems. And also they need to be able to kind of learn the skills of extrapolating the kinds of results that they are seeing here into their own countries. Again, many kinds of challenges in terms of financially. Often you have to be really determined to do your research in another country. It takes much more time, and then you do have to kind of just go through and look for the opportunities and try to find them. Postgraduate opportunities also. There are some, international agricultural research centers. Again, they do have those. I really recommend great opportunities for not just, even if you did all your research here, but then to be exposed to many different types of work, often working in a very interdisciplinary or transdisciplinary way. So really good opportunities in terms of, postdoc positions. But there are also others, Innovation labs, I think those innovation labs, there are 21 of them now in US universities. They have research projects going on in developing countries, and always with the scientists coming from those countries and from US. So you continue to really kind of work in that framework and are exposed also to research systems from other countries. Then the development work, and this is of course something that I have done most. There are, as I mentioned, diverse options. There are implementing organizations like where I am working, donor organizations, private sector. And I think one issue for scientists who are coming into development work is that, with a graduate degree, you always become a manager. And management is extremely important in terms of that work. So you might not be working that much in the field. You might not even sometimes work with the people who are actually working in the field, but you are then working at that next level, and your job is really to try to make sure that things are working okay in the field, right? So management, and I think preparation that way, is really important. Then volunteering, and I mentioned that, this was one, and I see all the time people after they have done really great careers in the US, and they come and volunteer with us, as farmer-to-farmer volunteers. It is very flexible. You can just, you go for a 2 to 4 week assignment. Everything is there ready for you. We have already identified a host organization. We have developed a scope of work. We are there to make sure that things will go okay. So for those who really might be looking for that first experience, after retirement or later in their career, or soon after master's degree, it is a really great way to go. And of course, we have Peace Corps also. It is less technical, but no age limit at all. I have run into Peace Corps volunteers who are in their 80s and are doing great work in the communities. So how can you prepare yourself? So one important thing is to get international exposure. But don't worry if you don't get it. You still have time to get it at some point. But the most important thing is to get good at something. It might not have to be a very specific kind of a work, but become good at doing something. Have a perspective that is yours. cultivate a diversity of interests, because when you go to the developing countries especially, it does help to be interested in many things, because you are going to be drawn into doing a lot of different kinds of things. And look for opportunities for engagement, however small. And then, of course, when you are there, show you can thrive. So I think, and this is, I think, very important for the younger also, and who are in the beginning of their career. So when you get there, you know, get really engaged and really learn from your experiences. So, but what about then when you are already there and you are working? So I think, you know, one important thing is, you know, you do have to be very persistent, you know. Often the opportunities are not that many, and especially now not, because more and more development work is looking to hire people from that country, which is a great thing. We are having more and more people who are educated, and therefore the international positions, for example, are really dwindling. So be flexible, look for opportunities, and it's of course especially true for two-career families. You know, when there are two of you looking for a job, you might not be able to be that picky always. So one thing I always remember, you know, from my graduate student days, was I took a course in political science, development administration. And it was with Göran Hayden, who is an Africanist. And in the beginning of the course, there was questions, we focused on what is development administration. So we went through all kinds of definitions of it. But one really is something that I still think about. And the definition was, it is development under difficult conditions. So that gives you the perspective that you need to often work in the conditions that you work in when you work in some of the developing countries. Instead of getting frustrated by some issues, you actually say, this is part of my work. So family issues, there are lots and lots of really wonderful countries there. It is many wonderful places to raise your family. There are issues there also and challenges. Third country kids is really a phenomenon, you know, so your children might not identify with your country eventually. They kind of identify with some third country, and they might end up living international lives also. At one level, you know, having two careers might be easier, you know, than it is here. And but then there are, for example, families with special needs, and those might be really hard. It might be really hard to find assistance there. Some negatives also, you know, we always want to think about kind of that everything has to happen during our own lifetime, but you know, development, I always say if development was easy, it would have been done already. So we have to think about that some of the processes that we are engaged in at the country level are processes that, you know, are by nature long-term processes. So they will take time, and you know, my 5-year project is not going to fix them all. So you do have to have that perspective and not to get frustrated. There are all kinds of other issues, you know, that we are aware of, you know, in some countries, in many countries, we have to be very conscious about making sure the funds are properly used. And you know, I always say these are taxpayers' money. You know, this is the normal taxpayers from the US who are paying for this. And, you know, I think personally also one important thing is you are going to be very far away from your families, you know, if you decide to do international work. Most of the time you then, you know, you see them only once or twice a year. And one important thing, final thing, is change is constant. You are always probably going to be changing projects, changing countries, and for some people it is a positive, for others it's a negative. There are all kinds of positive things also. I have mentioned many of them, so I'm not going to be any more going through them. But I think one thing that draws me most to this is that, you know, when you work internationally, it is amazing opportunity to be constantly learning. And you are learning not just about your work technically, but you are always learning about how is it that you as a kind of outsider are really trying to have this impact, trying to relate to different stakeholders, and how is it that you are in that particular setting, whether it is a country or doing regional work, what is really your role there, and what kind of legacy you leave once, that particular project might be finishing and you move to the next one. So thank you very much.
We do have time for questions, so I'm going to hand the mic to Marietta, and feel free to join in.
Very, very nice talk. One of the questions that one of the topics that we did not touch on was language. And most of us here come from non-Anglophone countries, so the Anglification of science, the predominance of English in sciences, means that they will have to learn English. How about students who grew up in an Anglo-centric culture where foreign languages are not taught? How important is learning a second language for an international career?
Well, it, I think, depends very much where you go. So if you go for, let's say in Africa, you work in Anglophone countries, you are completely fine with English. But if you work in the Francophone countries, you really are expected to know French. Or then Lusophone, you do have to know the Portuguese. So, but, there are plenty of English-speaking countries. And then, of course, Latin America, I think nowadays it is very difficult, I think, to get a job, like if you think about a longer-term job in the region without having either the Spanish or the Portuguese.
So when would students learn those languages? During university, during graduate school, on their own? It's not emphasized here in the States, obviously.
Yes, yeah, and I think often, you don't really necessarily know where you are going, so that way preparation might be hard. So I think really a lot of it is on your own, so let's say you get a job, for example, supporting a project in Francophone West Africa. You just start learning French, and you are surrounded by French, and I guess I'm quite confident that most people would learn French. One thing about, I'm talking about Africa, is that people are just extremely nice, and the expectation is not that you will speak the high French. It is to speak a French that people understand, and everyone is completely fine with that, right? So I don't think I don't think it is something that when you are a graduate student you necessarily have to think, well, I might be working in a Francophone country. Look at the opportunities, and if there are opportunities there, then start preparing for that. So.
Okay, thank you very much, Marietta.
Thank you.
So the organizers for the theme had more talks than we wanted, than we had time. So for two of them, we split them into two 10-minute segments. And our first speaker in those two 10-minute segments is Dr. Marta Coleman. Dr. Coleman is assistant professor in agronomy at the University of Wisconsin-Madison.
Thank you. Can you guys hear me in the back? Yeah, all right. So it's a pleasure for me to be here. And today I'm going to be talking about creating an educational experience that fosters diversity and inclusion. So a little bit of background and motivation for this. I wanted to start just setting the expectations a little bit. There are some limitations to this talk. As Dr. Sullenberger mentioned, I only have 10 minutes and 4 pages of an extended abstract to deal with this very dense subject. Just for perspective, I am a forage scientist by training. I'm not a social scientist. So, and I also only have experience in 2 educational systems, which are the Brazilian one and the American one. So I chose to do a literature review on the area of STEM, which stands for science, technology, engineering, and mathematics. But I hope this will be an opportunity for reflection for us as the individual and for us as a community, and also for us to feel motivated for what are future actions in terms of diversity. And I wanted to start by getting your attention to this figure. Some of you might be familiar with this image. This is the academic wheel of privilege. It's showing all these different categories. As you look at these bubbles, the closer they are to the center, the more privileged you might be. And I think we have a diverse group of people here. Probably each one of us can self-reflect a little bit and identify by being part of one of those bubbles in all of these different categories. So as we are looking at this academic wheel of privilege, the objectives of my presentation are to try and understand whether or not diversity is beneficial, what is underrepresentation, if there are barriers currently to diversity, and if there are effective policies that can help us overcome these hurdles, and also to give us some inspiration for moving forward. So is diversity beneficial? So first of all, there are more than one type of diversity. So typically, the first thing that comes to mind to us is a demographic diversity. So when we think about demographic diversity, we're typically thinking about diversity in gender, sexual orientation, race, and ethnicity. And I wanted to just as a parenthesis, mention that there is diversity also within groups, meaning that if an individual belongs to a specific group, 2 individuals might have very different experiences. So in other words, 2 female scientists, for example, might have very different experiences in terms of their career advancement. So oftentimes, there is a reason why the often is there. This diversity in terms of demographic characteristics brings about diversity of background, ideas of and network, which brings about innovation, creativity, and better problem-solving skills. But there is also diversity in terms of cognitive ability and training. And again, there is diversity within groups. And it's been shown that groups that are composed of individuals who come from diverse cognitive backgrounds outperform more homogeneous groups. And there's also personal diversity, which basically addresses diversity of experience. So we already heard from some of the previous speakers that there is diversity in terms of your own experience. Not only you can go through different institutions, different organizations, but you can also invest time in building those relationships with a diverse group of people. So all of this together bring a lot of benefit, which is beneficial for us to address all these complex issues that we have to address as a scientific community. And I would also argue that most of us feel a moral obligation to foster diversity. So what is underrepresentation? Basically, what we're looking at is that a population should be represented in a given discipline, meaning that if it's not represented, then they are underrepresented. And some of you might also be familiar with this image, the difference between equity and equality. So the idea here is that if we want to really foster diversity, we need to understand that one size fits all is not an adequate way to make sure that everyone's going to be successful during training. And again, this has been mentioned already in the mentoring skill set, that each student is different. So providing those tools for students to be successful is really important. And again, looking at the academic wheel of privilege, I think we can all probably think back in our own training and think about things that were important for us as individuals to learn to be successful. So are there barriers to diversity? So some of these barriers are very much historical in terms of how universities' infrastructure and programs were developed. But I wanted to focus just a little bit on negative implicit bias, and I'm going to show 3 different studies here. The first one, there was a CV, a curriculum vitae, submitted for a laboratory management position where the candidate addressed an interest to pursue graduate school in the future. And all the CVs were exactly the same, but they had either a stereotypically female or stereotypically male name associated to them. And they were submitted to both male and female faculty. And what was saw is that if that CV, they're all the same, if they had a stereotypically female name, that CV was considered to be less competent, less worthy, and lower salary deserving. When, on the other hand, if they had a stereotypically male name, faculty, both female and male, were more interested in offer mentoring opportunities. Very similarly, a postdoc looking for a tenure track position, there was another study showing stereotypically female and male names, and also from different ethnicities. And what they found is that if the name, independent of gender, if the name was stereotypically white or Asian, the candidate was perceived as being more competent than Latin or African Americans. And the females, independent of ethnicity, were considered more likable, but less competent and less likely to be hired. And finally, for African American students, there was a study that showed that when those students were being educated in the traditionally Black colleges and universities, they felt more encouraged. They had more access to good quality mentoring to pursue a career in sciences. But when they were in land-grant universities, they were not encouraged. So are there effective policies that can help overcome these barriers? So there are a couple of steps that have proven to be very effective. One of them is to educate the community about the existence of bias. The other one is multiculturalism, so valuing the differences between cultures is effective. And also policies that support younger families. So both men and women that have young children tend to leave STEM, but women tend to be more strongly penalized. So I wanted to address this in 3 different steps. So there are 3 parts for this: recruitment, retention, and advancement that are required for success. So in terms of recruitment, representation has been proven to be very important to attract students, but it's not sufficient. And one of the things that we should be careful about is not to delegate that responsibility only to other minority groups, because that can bring a lot of emotional cost and is typically not a compensated activity. However, and hopefully we're all very inspired now for mentoring, mentoring quality is really a huge determinant for success, and that is independent of mentor and mentee belonging to the same demographic group, meaning that all of us can make a difference in increasing diversity and retention and advancement. So now moving forward, I do believe that we're gonna need to do some organized and intentional effort to address these issues. Right now, I was not able to find, although if you know of it, please direct me to it, I was not able to find any work on this subject that was in the forage sciences. So right now, we really don't know at what point we are. So we're gonna have to open that box and look at it and collect some data, I think, to see at what state we are currently. Create policies and mechanisms to foster diversity. And we're gonna need to evaluate how effective they are, and as needed, we're gonna need to reevaluate those policies as well. Thank you, this is my talk. I think I have maybe time for a couple of questions.
Okay, time for a question or 2 from Mark.
Yes.
I've been at 3 institutions in the Midwest
So the question is if I'm aware of any policies to attract more students to courses who come from a farming background. I actually am not aware. I don't know if anyone from the audience might know of. Anybody knows of
There are often scholarships that are offered at local levels, state levels that incentivize that, but yeah, not even policies.
I know another opportunity in Michigan recently, well, I guess not so recently now, but the FFA program started giving students credit to Michigan State if they receive their state FFA degree. So it's an opportunity for them to pursue FFA and then go on and have support at the university level as well. And typically, a portion of the FFA students were related directly to a farming background.
Thank you very much, Mark. So our last speaker for today is Kenneth Odor. Kenneth is a PhD student. He is doing his PhD at the University of Florida. He's from Kenya and is doing his research in Kenya. And so he's going to represent that perspective for us today. Kenneth.
Thank you for the introduction, Professor. I'm going to talk about this topic. Is there a need for tailored graduate programs for international students? Maybe we might not be able to completely make an overhaul change to our graduate programs, but I believe that after my 10 minutes talk, we will be able to at least pick one or two pieces that we are going to incorporate into our programs. If not at macro level, probably within our labs for the sake of the international students. I want to thank those who helped me to put up this article. So I'm going to talk about my academic journey briefly, just to know where I am from and where I am now. I'll talk about a few demographics about the international students here in the US. I'll also talk about the challenges that they face and some of the possible ways that this can be addressed. I'll also share some of the experiences that I personally have had at University of Florida, specifically at Mariana Center, and then I will conclude. So I come from Kenya, to be more precise, western part of the country. And I started my journey in education way back in 2002. I attended Grassland Primary School, and what a coincidence that today, being the first time that I'm also attending a Grassland Congress. I really feel so much privileged. I did my undergraduate at the University of Nairobi. I pursued agricultural education and extension. I completed that in 2013. And then I got a scholarship in the same university to pursue my master's in agronomy. And then I finished that in 2016. And then I got a job in Somalia, where I worked for 5 years. And then I got this opportunity to pursue PhD in agronomy at the University of Florida in summer of 2021. A little bit about demographics, about the population of international graduate students here in the US. And this number has been on the rise over the years. And somewhere between 2016 to 2018, the number hit almost 1 million. And that really shows the contribution of international students within the education systems here in the US. There was kind of a little bit of a decline in 2020, and I could attribute this to changes that were brought by COVID-19. And in terms of representation from different countries worldwide, China, South Korea, and India are actually on the lead in terms of the numbers of the students here in the US. And mainly, most of the international students attribute strong programs that are available here in the US in a way that they can be able to offer them strong skills and knowledge that can make them either competitive in the job market back in their countries or even here in the US. But what is it, or how does it look like to study abroad? This comes with a lot of challenges as well. And some of these challenges, unless we are able to address them, then they can compromise their learning process as well as their career development. And so I dug into the literature, and some of the challenges that I found were the cultural and language barriers. Because most of the students come from a very diverse cultural background, and once they get into the US, they might want to continue with their culture, which is completely different from what it is here. Some of them also come and they might get a culture shock, something that is completely different from what they do into their country, in their countries. And so some of the solutions that I thought could be able to address this is some of our programs could potentially combine academic and non-academic activities. We could also foster interactions between international students and the local students, and also sometimes matching students, a prospective international student with a local student. I also found that technological literacy and competency is a problem among international students, especially students who come from low-income countries. Aspects like online teaching probably are things that they just experienced during COVID-19, and they don't have a lot of experience in that. So sometimes you get into a class, it's 100% online, yet you are used to face-to-face teaching. So you might develop the fear, the anxiety even to disrupt the lecture and ask questions. And so adequate orientation, having short trainings, having technological support could be imperative in helping international students to kind of avoid this challenge. I also found mentorship and career development being a challenge. And personally, this was a culture shock. Probably we might have a conversation later during the panel. But the kind of relationship that I had with my advisor was so distant as compared to the kind of relationship that I have with my advisor here. And so kind of understanding the previous history, the previous experience of international students might help to be able to bridge this gap. Horizontal mentorship could also be a way to address this. And what I mean by this is that older international students or older local students who are already into programs could be of help to mentor fresh international graduates who just arrive. Having student organizations really comes in handy because this is where they get to mingle and even share experiences. Having channels for sharing opportunities is very, very important because some of them also aspire to work into some of these organizations. The last one that I found was course structure and research. To be very honest, the demand in terms of coursework here in the US is kind of intense. And so it's good, it's good for students to be able to know, to have expectations or to know what their professors expect out of them beforehand. And so also research areas is something that I thought could address this area, in that if we can have a holistic development of international graduate students so that they have knowledge and skills to be able to address challenges globally, but more specifically to have knowledge and skills that they can use to address challenges that they face in their home countries. And so from this slide, henceforth, I'll just share my experience at University of Florida in Mariana. And we have 4 teams there, and ideally this is a very diverse group from several countries, as you can see in the list. And we really work together as a team, helping each other even in between the programs. And that is really, really important in fostering inclusivity, even with this great diversity that we have. But we also have social events. We play soccer together, you know, we go watch the Gator team, And all this really cement us as one as we learn from each other. We also get together at the center, and we are able to celebrate Thanksgiving, have a meal together. We are able to celebrate Christmas holiday together. And also we have annual food events that we are able to come together, show our diversity, different kind of foods that we have, and exchange ideas. We also have student organizations, we have trainings and conferences, and all this draws from different pool of professors who also have students, and so extension agents. And so if at the time of the meeting we are able to exchange knowledge, we are able to know each other, they're able to share with us the systems here in the US. I didn't want to end this presentation without mentioning the project that I do. My project is in Kenya, and this really shows the importance of international students doing research back in their home countries and helping solve the problems that they face there. So in my project, I'm working with invasive cactus species, and this invasive cactus species is problematic within this pastoral community, and so the idea is to eradicate this plant. But we thought in my project that why not utilize this plant species in a way that the community can be able to have some useful benefit out of it. And so I'm utilizing the biomass from cactus to be able to supplement camel to see if we can be able to optimize milk production, especially during dry periods. But most importantly, I'm also using this biomass to be able to generate biogas for cooking, because they don't have any source of fuel and they have to go to the bush to look for firewood. And just to conclude, the challenges that I've mentioned are really, really real amongst international graduate students, and therefore they need to be addressed. And this will be able to foster learning and also address some of the challenges that international graduate students face. I thank you.
Okay, so maybe some of the speakers could grab a few chairs, and we're going to scatter out here in the front, give you opportunity to engage in some discussion. While we're doing that, Kenneth, I was going to then offer an opportunity for anybody who had a specific follow-up to Kenneth, or maybe at this point, let's just wait and we'll make you the kind of lead-off hitter here. Okay. So we've got a couple of mics, so questions? Yes.
Actually, my question's to you. In your definition of mentoring, you talked about good communication skills, but I thought there might have been a bit more emphasis on listening skills.
On communication skills
Sorry.
as opposed to listening skills.
Yeah.
Okay, yeah, point well taken. 20 minutes apparently wasn't enough time, huh? But yeah, I mean, I think time is part of that, and creating an environment that is conducive. And maybe if of any point that I made, it's that issue of efficient time management, which is an important characteristic for those of us in academia. But if our graduate students feel like our time is so precious that we have none for them, then the opportunities for engagement and listening are limited.
My listening skills to me was more about, sorry.
That one's on, I know.
Yeah. My listening skills were more about actually listening to what they're saying, rather than hearing what you think you want to hear from them. It's slightly different because I had a slight mentoring role, and I'm not academic, this is in farming, and a question was put to these farmers, and you could see actually the listening was more by visual, their reaction to the question, and their response wasn't quite congruous with what their personal reaction was. So was giving me clues that I needed to ask more questions rather than just respond to what they were saying.
Other questions?
You talked about mentoring for research and extension. There's a third leg. How about mentoring for teaching? There are a number and a growing number of positions in land-grant schools, but a number of non-land-grant schools that the job is full-time teaching. Where is the mentoring for teaching and a de-emphasis on research?
Yeah, that's something that I focus on too. I didn't talk about the class in here, but I teach a communications course. And I think traditionally at universities, communication courses are just about, how do you write a scientific article or how do you give a scientific presentation? But I spend 2 weeks on teaching. So developing a pedagogy, how do you execute a lesson plan? I agree. I think that's something that needs to be included more often, particularly because everybody's probably going to have some teaching when they move on from school. And I do feel that's something that's overlooked that I'm trying to focus a little bit more on in my programs.
Great. An advertisement here. We're looking for a range livestock position at Chadron State College, somebody that can teach grazing management. Teach, no research.
Well, actually, I would like to add in that question about extension. What about how to teach extension on an academy?
Obviously, experience is one way, and giving feedback to the individual as they're doing it. Teaching extension in that way can be often very intimidating, though, for whomever's doing it. And I think it has to be done in a way in which they are comfortable. Obviously, their subject that they're working on for their degree or something like that is also puts them a bit more at ease. One of the mentors that I had as part of my master's degree when I first became a county extension agent, he said for the first 6 months or a year, make your work that happened to be on baled silage, make that a kind of a central point of your extension effort, because you know it, you're comfortable with it, develop your skills, and expand beyond that. Extension is a little different than teaching because you never know what's going to be asked of that person when they're standing in front of a group. And so as a result of that, it can be very intimidating. So it has to be something that they're very comfortable with, and once they build their confidence and skill, I think they can easily or more easily be able to expand beyond that.
Talking a little bit further about the mentor-mentee relationship, how do you at different universities go about a honest appraisal of both the mentor and the mentee throughout the year, and what does that process look like? Is it just a conversation, or is it something formal, or what do you guys utilize?
You want me to start? I'll give you a perspective from University of Georgia where I was at, but also give you a little perspective from ARS and what we do at the Dairy Forage Research Center as well, or at least I try to do, David. I may not always be good at it. At the university, for young faculty, they were assigned a committee relatively early on. Nick Hill and let's see, there were 3 people on my committee, Eric Prosco and 2 others that were extension folks from South Georgia were on my committee to kind of advise me. They would come and occasionally view some of my presentations, give me some feedback, tell me where I kind of missed the mark or what I need to drill down a little further in, etc. To be honest with you, that pretty much played out after year 3. Beyond that, there was less mentorship directly. It was more indirectly at that point in my situation, which was more casual interchange, and often if they were on the program, then they would give me some kind of feedback. In ARS, one of the things that we like to do at the Dairy Forage Research Center is try to pair folks with other scientists, not necessarily in their own discipline, but someone else in another research unit even, to give them a little bit different perspective, to talk about their project and their effort, their research effort, to give them a little feedback on that. There's also a very rigorous project plan review process, so in ARS. We're going through that right now in Davis project, but so there's some feedback that comes along with that. Unfortunately, I would say that there's not a lot of feedback until we get into the process of doing the promotion process, which is analogous to the tenure review and promotion process in academia.
Just a couple quick comments. So at University of Florida, we have a mentoring academy for new faculty. It's a semester-long program that they go through to be exposed to mentoring theory and practice. In terms of evaluation of mentees, all of our graduate students are evaluated annually, and we also have individual development plans for graduate students, so that would be the context for which a lot of that evaluation would occur. I would say we're weak in terms of evaluation of mentoring ability or mentoring practice of individual faculty. At this point, I think that's perhaps a gap in our programs. Anybody else want to comment on that question? You good? Okay, next question. Go ahead.
Can I maybe say one other thing? I want to talk a little bit about the bad side of things. That sometimes things go wrong, especially when you have a faculty member who is setting a very high bar of expectation for the graduate student. And I would encourage other faculty and other graduate students to be aware of those situations and report that to people who can make a difference. The person who is in charge may not always see that. The department head, department chair, research leader in the case of ARS or center director may not always see it. So it's important to kind of share that. If you see something, say something type of arrangement, because that can be very devastating, especially to graduate students, master's, PhD, and postdocs as well. It can be career killers for those folks.
And as you were talking, Dennis, I thought, so in my role as graduate coordinator, I'm basically an ombudsman for graduate students who are having issues in their program. And so I'm typically the person they come to if they're having an issue with their advisor. And there have been circumstances over time where, that led to a conversation between me and the department chair. And, there have been situations where the department chair basically set up a independent study with a faculty member to improve their mentoring skills and the morale of their lab group. Other questions?
Can I ask?
Absolutely.
Okay. So, one thing that, I've been thinking throughout these mentoring presentations, and then of course some of it is also applicable to like my work as I supervise people, is that how that relationship can be quite different and should probably be quite different depending on the personality of the mentee or the staff member you are supervising, right? Certain issues come up with certain individuals, they don't come up at all with others. So do you want to talk a little bit in the context of kind of academic mentorship? How is it that relationship changes based on the mentee? And it can be also skills, it can be issues like that. And even though there are some kind of principles that have been, I think, discussed, transparency, open communication, etc. But how have you seen that change also, depending on the personalities?
I think I was going to bring it up in the past one, but we talked a lot about it. I think I teach, or I mentor a lot of non-thesis master students. And that's very, very difficult because a lot of times it's adults, they have careers, they have a ton of stress outside of school. And so for me, it's really been about meeting them where they're at. And that usually starts with a pretty clear conversation early on. Sometimes it's hard because they don't want to talk about those kinds of things. But I don't believe it's a one size fits all when it comes to the mentoring approach. So for me, it's really about sitting down with that person, having a frank conversation about where you at, what are you doing, and really digging down into why are you doing this program. And I think that's one thing that's really unique about non-thesis is they all have a very specific goal in mind. There's a reason why they're doing that program. And so for me, it's just about taking the time, which is sometimes challenging, but taking the time to sit down and get to know where they're at and figuring out, all right, how can I lead them to step B and step C?
Yeah, I also think that to keep this momentum going, to keep this relationship really strong, the drive should come also from the graduate student or the student who is being mentored. Because here comes a situation where you are really putting in your effort, and we know most of our faculties are really busy. They don't have the time. And so sometimes if the drive doesn't come from the student himself or herself, it really becomes difficult. So that is just a take home for the graduate students who are here, that let's be the driving force to keep the momentum of this mentorship relationship.
Hello, my name is Frank, and thank you for some great presentations. Just 2 sentences. I'm from HR. I'm not a scientist. I have a master in psychology. And I would just like all of you to answer the question, what is most important, what you do or who you are?
You can start that.
You got a longer time in the job.
Longer sample size. Huh?
Your data points are more extensive than my power.
So I would say that who you are is the starting point that allows what you do to matter. Okay? So put simply, is that statement clear? Does that make sense?
Yeah, and the reason I'm asking is because I've done a lot of therapy over the years with people with burnout, stress, anxiety, not coping with the real world, and finding the right balances. So it's actually quite an important question. And if who you are is the most important one, is mentoring then enough?
Somebody.
Everybody's rushing for the microphone on this one. So, so for me, it's definitely who I am. I think I've lived multiple scientific lives. I started out in fisheries. I've been teaching for years. Now I do agronomy. And so for me, it's been mostly about following my passions and the things that I want to do and the kind of impact I want to have on students. The whole reason I went back and got a PhD was because I wanted to mentor students at this level. And so for me, it's much more about who I am and what my values are, and then applying those, I think, like Lynn said, to what I do. But I do think that's a really hard thing to get across to students in your mentoring, because they're so focused on, I want to get a PhD, I want to get a master's, I want to get a job, and it's not necessarily as much about that sometimes. So I think that's a good point. That's a message we're probably not great at as mentors sometimes of conveying, even if we follow it ourselves.
So this being a philosophical question, I'm going to answer in a philosophical manner, which hopefully is fair. And one of the things that I've wondered about being an international and being a woman and being born on this century is, if I had I been born in a different country or in a different time, like 500 years ago, where access for education was very limited to women, what would I be doing? That is one of the questions that keeps me awake at night. And I think that I would be doing this in some capacity, which I think that who I am is what brought me to this career. And I think that, you know, if my life had been different, I would still be it would be manifested in a different manner, but this drive to be significant to society and to be a mentor to other people, I think would still be the driving force for life decision. But yeah, I think it's important to keep in mind when we're in this role.
Since we have started, maybe I can also say something. You know, when you work in international development, you know, there are people who come to you in, you know, the whatever, college reunion or, you know, places like that, and they say, oh my God, you know, you are doing this work, you're doing amazing work. You know, look at me, I'm just, you know, in whatever, investment banking, and this is all I've done with my life. And, you know, one thing I always say to those people is that, you know, I do it because I like doing it, because I enjoy it. And, you know, I think maybe it is also something that did not come through, you know, in my presentation enough, is that, you know, you should only do international work if it is something that you really have your heart in, you enjoy it, you enjoy being, you know, all the amazing experiences that you can have. But for another individual, those same kind of strength of experiences, you know, can come from continuing to work on their farm. You know, there's nothing wrong with that, you know, so it is about, you know, what is there for you, and then what is important for you, what makes you happy eventually, because that's when you can also contribute. So thank you for the very philosophical question. Thank you. Any other? Oh, okay.
Thank you for the question. I think you can only pass on what you have. You can't give what you don't have. And what I believe on is if you're a mango tree, you'll only give mango fruits. You will not be able to give anything else. So I think it all lies with who I am. I mean, it's what I have, it's the values that I have that I'll be able to pass them on.
I will just briefly say that I probably am the worst person to answer that question, because I have probably the least division between those things I've found, and it has led to a lot of burnout. I do think there are subsets of who you are is what you do, and as I showed earlier, my passion for what I do really does drive my totality. But I reached a point after tenure where I found myself unfulfilled, right? There were other things I wanted to do in life other than riding them down the road and doing extension talks. And I went through kind of some people call it a midlife crisis or whatever, but started doing, extreme dieting and running and a lot of other things to escape, to try to find other things to interest me, even extreme kinds of things, extreme sports. And so I think one has to be very aware of that. And to your point, I think the biggest thing that we have to do as academics is to ingrain upon our students that they don't have to do it that way, right? And I had lunch with my former graduate students that are here at the conference on Tuesday, and I told them, I said, I gave you a poor example. I did. I worked too hard, didn't show them how that I played and refreshed. I didn't provide them that example. And yes, a tree is only going to bear that type of fruit, but it also gives shade, right? I think you have to look at the other aspects of your life. That may be your primary purpose, but there's also additional parts of who you are beyond that.
I guess this shows if you ask a bunch of PhDs a philosophical question, you get a lot of philosophy. Is there?
It is a PhD stand for that, right?
It does, Dr. Philosophy, yeah. So we've run over time, but I give opportunity for another quick question or two if anybody has one that they really wanted to ask. And
hello, everyone. My question to you, and this is something that I've been reflecting a lot, and I know a lot of universities have as well over the past years. So we're talking about trying to foster diversity on the graduate level. For you, what is the importance of also having those faculty on your body that represent different minorities or even bring that diversity? And I think this goes along with this last question and what all we're talking about, because then we can have different experiences and different points of view. So what would be your thoughts on ways, how that should be handled in terms of the faculty body? Is that important to have the diversity, and how that could be approached?
Okay, I'm guessing that's for me, but I'm hoping to get some other feedback. So your question is whether or not it's valuable to have diversity at the faculty level, as in having your colleagues from a diverse background? Yeah. So how important is it? I think it's very important. I think one of the things that I've been reflecting upon is diversity of experience. So not everyone is tailored to live abroad, for example, or for whatever reason, perhaps health related or whatever it is, are not able to relocate a lot. But diversity, personal diversity, comes from experiencing those relationships with a diverse group of people. So I think number one, and that's one of the reasons why I put the wheel figure there, is that we need to be aware that as we are at different points on those circles, everyone else around us is also. And a lot of those things are things that we don't know about our colleagues. So being aware of it, I think, is very important. My experience is that it has been very beneficial to me to listen from colleagues from different backgrounds and experiences, and I think it has allowed me to be a better professional. I don't know if that answers your question.
Yeah, I think for me, I think you mentioned grass grows grass. I think diversity grows diversity, and we see over and over again, if faculty are diverse, students are diverse, and so I think that's a really important example. And I know for us, just to give you an example, I've tried doing hires blind. So when we get applications, this goes back to some implicit bias that Marta was talking about. We take the names off, we redact it all, and we just go based on the CV. And so you don't see then some of those things that she mentioned in her presentation. So I would encourage people to look into that if anybody wants to talk about that. I went through it, so I know some of the challenges with it, but I think that's an important step for us to make sure that we're getting not just the best candidates, but we're also giving everybody a fair shake.
Yeah, I think having a diverse faculty is really important, and coming from a perspective of an international student, I mean, first of all, getting a faculty into your institution that comes from elsewhere gives you a motivation that, hey, look, there are also people from elsewhere here and who can also support you, can advise you, walk the journey with you. And especially if some of these faculty happen to have undergone through the same system, have schooled in the same university, or maybe other universities within the US, then you're sure of having a share of the culture, of the systems, and how things happen. And so with that, you're able to grow strong and pursue your education with a lot of confidence and success.
okay, I warned the group that I'd never been at a professional meeting where we tried to do a session like this. And I suggested that it may actually be the six of us talking to each other for the whole time. And I asked them to develop questions to ask each other during the panel discussion period. So I guess what I would like to say is thank you to all of you for prioritizing this conversation, for your active participation in the activity. And I would express appreciation to my colleagues for putting forward some excellent ideas and thoughts about this topic of mentoring within a wide range of contexts. So thank you all very much. We appreciate it.